Hey, two hands right away. And I know you guys. I don't know who to pick. Jennifer, we'll go with you, then John and Dave. And someone be...
An original member of the roadmap back when it was Save the Children then?
Yeah.
I also think I saw a hand kind of shooting out behind a pillar. There it is.
That's the fifth pillar.
That's the fifth pillar of the roadmap. If at that stage, somebody back there can kind of point that, hey, there's people back here also with their hands up. Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Jennifer Rigg with the 1,000 Days Partnership. Huge thanks to all of you. On the administration point, the transition, I think one piece that helped us with the initial roadmap was starting before the Obama administration officially began with the policy bench as people were coming in. We're not quite there yet, but just a bug in everybody's ear, this would be the time to start thinking about that. And for those of you that are already doing campaign work, to start to get ready across, building on that bipartisanship that Rick mentioned. Secondly, love what you said, what all of you have been mentioning, and Liz, thanks for mentioning that we need to get to the finance ministers and those at FFD and elsewhere that we're not yet reaching. So I'd like to ask all of you to dream big for the coming year. What's your big, hairy, audacious goal, if you will, for the Nutrition for Growth event in Rio around the Summer Olympics? Real potential, not only to, on the global stage, speak to what's been accomplished at that point, but also make new commitments, new pledges, new funding, and do it in a way that is comprehensive. The government of Brazil very much leads on all four of the pillars, along with many of their partners in the global south. So what, if you were to dream big, don't even worry about the congressional appropriations, what would you like to see happen over the next year to get us to where we need to be? Thank you.
Yeah, that's more of a nightmare. So if we go to the dreams, can be a nightmare. And I'll also give in line with that with the original roadmap at the transitional period and looking at this as a time to influence, I think is really key. And I'll just say that at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, also the report that came out 2008, early 2009 then, on the recommending renewed leadership of the United States, both the White House and the Senate and all bodies, and Congress, in ending hunger, particularly through agriculture development, also hit at that time, which I think was really critical, which is why I'd asked that. So, dreams.
I have a dream. My dream, and I spoke about this before, so I will be a broken record on this, Nutrition for Growth. I want everyone that is there to come with strong commitments, and more important than U.S. government, and of course I'll say that, but more important than U.S. government, I want the private sector there. I want us in this room to spend the next year building relationships with the private sector and creating very strong, very comprehensive programs with them so that their resources are available to reach our common goals.
Rick, Schengen, anybody?
Well, I think the private sector is very critical. It's not just their resources, but also their business practices. If they can change their business practice for achieving nutrition and health outcome, not just the profit, not just the money, it will be probably much more important than their donation, their financial resources.
Well, the big picture dream, and then comment on what Jennifer said as well. And that is, countries around the world, I think your point that not fully understanding what is required to achieve these goals is learn from the models that work and have the capacity building technical assistance that's necessary to help countries get to a point of achievement on the 1,000 days goals, able to embrace it. Let me just say that on the finance minister piece, the thing that allowed Guatemala to be successful is the finance minister was part of the process. And required to. It was the political leadership from the president of the country that ordered all of the ministers to be involved. That was part of the key to success. And I'll tell you, back to Roadmap 1, what is a really interesting thing, yes, it was released before the presidential election, and then at the transition meeting, when the Obama team was coming in, before he actually took office, it was a pretty amazing thing. There was 6 people from Roadmap at the transition meeting, and we all sat 6 seats apart. So that when they were going around the room for major recommendations, every 6th speaker was saying the same thing. It was really well planned, and I think we just need to continue it. We know that if one candidate wins, there's already a deep commitment, and we just need to work on the others.
John.
Yeah, thank you. John Coonrod with the Hunger Project. I have a specific question about getting the comprehensiveness thing to work. Because where the strategies for nutrition comprehensively need to come together are at the community level. And USAID doesn't currently have a mechanism for supporting comprehensive community-led development. So there are silos in funding, but comprehensiveness is recognized as the right strategy to go. So my question is, how can we help the US government find ways to support comprehensive community-led development?
Yep, that's a great question. Liz? Is that
Well, and I think that that speaks to a larger problem, and I think that when I have conversations with people about nutrition and hunger, we've spent the last couple years really building the awareness and kind of building this global momentum around nutrition. But what we haven't figured out how to do yet is really to translate that global momentum down to the district level, down to the local level. So I don't think it's just USAID's problem or the US government's problem. I think it cuts across, I think it's within the Sun movement, making sure that that's decentralized and we're really getting down to the local level. And I think it's across the board. I think it's a really tricky nut to crack. But I think that the first stage is really understanding how important that local level is and also finding ways, instead of just trickling down, how do we kind of build from the bottom up?
Rick?
Well, there is a very good example in India, that is in Maharashtra, the community nutrition movement. So from the chief minister to the district leadership to block leadership, community level leadership, down to household. At the household, actually, everything is integrated, right? So because of their effort, they have cut the child stunting by more than 10% in a decade. So might be important to look at that case. The Global Nutrition Report has highlighted that case.
And I'll just conclude this by saying political will. We need to ensure that there's a political will in these countries to get the job done. And there are commitments around Sun, but I think we need to help build up that political will at a leadership level in country. And sometimes that's our ambassadors' contact with political leadership. But also critically important, as mentioned, is ensuring that the assistance, the capacity building, the technical assistance, the information is also transmitted throughout the country. When we were in Guatemala talking with leadership there, they were not fully aware of A, the magnitude of the problem, and B, what needed to be done to address it. We know what needs to be done. I mean, it's clearly laid out, the specific intervention. So I think it's eminently doable. And in terms of the big picture goal, let's build that political will across the world. Let's provide the assistance necessary, and we can have a substantial impact on early childhood nutrition, malnutrition within a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, Rick, I was also going to say, and John, thanks for that, that when you look at Guatemala, kind of not, also a lack of awareness then of what's going on the ground and in the specific communities. And there's so much activity in some of these countries, and if you just take Guatemala as an example, and the USAID and the US government funding so many great projects that are going on there, in terms of the comprehensiveness, and when I'm there and in those communities, you kind of ask them, and you're talking to the people or even just the individual families or the community leaders, also kind of a lack of awareness among them of who's kind of what's coming from the government, what is from these organizations. And so I'm often left with the question of, is anybody kind of coordinating these things? We talk about the comprehensiveness, but the activities on the ground, who's to be coordinating them? Because the U.S. has such a financial stake there, commitment. Should the U.S. and USAID be doing more of the coordination? Is it up to the local government or the national government themselves?
I think that's an incredibly important question and one that we haven't figured out yet. Coordination, it seems so simple and it doesn't seem as important as the other things, but if we don't have it, we just can't do what we're trying to do, whether it's USAID programs talking to USAID programs, or USAID programs talking to USDA programs, or then government to government, government to civil society, government to country of government, and all the way up and down the line. It's just so important. And I think that we need two things about that. One, I think that we need to empower local governments and empower the national community and the national government to really be in charge of their own coordination. It's hard to do. It's easier just to say, I'm going to do it myself, but we really shouldn't. If it's a longer road, if it's a harder road, we really need to empower that national government to be able to control their own coordination of all the donors and all the programs in country. And second, I can say that we're working towards this. This is one of the reasons why we're doing this whole of government coordination plan on nutrition. It's coordination. It's saying, let's just make sure we know what everyone's doing at the country level and at the headquarters level, because right now we don't. And that's the first step to really being able to maximize our investments.
Right. Well, the whole, and we're also talking about the multi-sectoral nature, and it's also addressed in the Global Hunger Index, and what Schengen was talking about, that it seems that for the 1,000 Days Initiative for scaling up nutrition, so many things are important in that. It's the agriculture, it's the nutrition, it's all the WASH issues, it's the environmental enteropathy, it's kind of everything that goes on into there, and so all those activities have to be coordinated too, that, yeah, hooray, you're doing this, but it really relates to everything that these other folks are doing too, and kind of who's on the ground with that. David. Mike up here, and then we'll go behind the pillar. The hand is still there. Thank you. Okay.
Thank
You're
you,
on
David
deck.
Lambert, DPL. Thanks for your good work and valuable insights. I'd like to bore down more on the nutrition question, and more specifically, how do we change the economic incentives? A number of respected critics, including some in this room, have argued forcefully that nutrition is in reality, notwithstanding the lip service, it is not a priority with any major institution in our society or the United Nations, certainly not with the medical profession, not with the teaching profession, and in spite of individual heroes, it's never been a priority with Congress. Rob Perlberg was here 3 weeks ago, and he said in many cases on malnutrition, we don't try to mitigate anymore, we just adapt to it. We have a lot more surgery and a lot more pharmacy and other things. So there's a lot more money in performing surgery than there is in dispensing nutrition information. How do we change the economic incentive to encourage nutrition getting a higher place in our society?
Any ideas? Schengen?
Well, from my perspective, what Rick mentioned about the political will, I think starting from the national leaders. Recently, I have had several chances to meet with national leaders in Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Rwanda, the prime ministers or presidents. They are very much committed to tackle the malnutrition problem. So under their leadership, they try to set up some sort of nutrition coordination function in the office. Malawi also has a nutrition officer in the president's office. That office tries to coordinate the efforts from different ministries to see whether some of the policies actually are at the cross purposes. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture. Its objective is always to produce more food or self-sufficiency. By doing that, the country subsidizes food production to subsidize water, electricity, fertilizers. By doing that, so more calories has been produced at the cost of vegetables, fruits, dairy production. By doing that, the natural resources have been degraded. The water table is coming down. Water is polluted by the use of pesticides and the fertilizers. Economically, it's not efficient because the farmers would overuse these inputs above the optimal level. So if you communicate that message to the Prime Minister, hey, if you can change that policy or correct that policy, you will gain economically, your population will be healthier, your environment will be sustainable. If the top leaders understand that, then they will begin to make sure that Minister of Agriculture should be accountable for the nutrition outcome instead of self-sufficiency. Minister of Finance should allocate more money to agriculture, produce more food instead of to doctors to have more operations to help to reduce the obesity and overweight.
Rick, any other ideas? Or?
Well, I'll just say we don't need to travel overseas to look at this issue and the problem. And I think the challenge for us is to communicate the economic implications of malnutrition. And I would include obesity as part of malnutrition, improper nutrition. So we have a major challenge here. Anyone who has small children, go ask your pediatrician about nutrition. You'll learn more reading the cereal box. I think the problem is political will and education. I mean, go to our medical schools. How much are they learning about nutrition? And so I think we have a major challenge. We don't have to go overseas. We need to look here as well about proper nutrition. I think there is more and more understanding from a cost standpoint that it is a problem. There's now insurance companies that are incentivizing better health because they realize they will pay more for all these procedures you mentioned due to improper nutrition. So I think this is a major challenge for us in America and around the world, and looking at the economic implications might be the way to help turn a lot of it around. But I think you put your finger on something, Dave, that's so critically important for all of us.
Can I just add one
Yep,
point to
please.
that? So I think that really important point, and one of the things that I've come to realize is that what would raise the profile of nutrition is if it was an emergency, if it was Ebola, if it was, well, it is. One can argue that nutrition is an emergency, but you can't see it. That's why it's called hidden hunger. That's why in communities children are stunted, but their parents and their families don't recognize it because everyone in the community is stunted, and that's just the cycle of what they look like. It looks normal. So the problem with nutrition is that we know that it's an emergency, but it doesn't look like an emergency. And so Ebola and AIDS and other issues that are more visual get the dollars. So I think that that just means that we have a harder road to toll, and it means that getting back to a point I made earlier is that our messages have to be on point, they have to be right, they have to be compelling, they have to be comprehensive, and we really, it's hard. We don't have a simple magic bullet that we can just hand people, but we have to figure out how we can be very compelling in the messages that we tell. And I think that the roadmap is a good start. It has those 4 pillars. It's comprehensive. We have the Zero Hunger Challenge that's also very visionary. We have, even with the World Health Assembly, we have the policy briefs that have come along with it that really show how we dig into these very complex issues. So it's not the only thing, but the messaging is really what we need to do a lot of.
Can
Thank
I
you.
add to that?
Yep.
That we all need to read Roger's book that's coming out.
Please!
I get a cut.
I was going to say under dreams, that would be, thank you.
But I think Liz is right on point, that we need to figure out, and Frank Sesno has his event going on right now as well, which is all about storytelling. How do you communicate through storytelling? We got to figure out how to do a better job of telling the story of undernutrition, of malnutrition, because we think the roadmap and the index is great and we've all read it, but there's a much broader audience that we need to reach on this issue.
I'll second that motion.
Read your book.
Well, that's what I can do. Is you guys are on the front lines doing all sorts of stuff. I can raise the alarm or write about it. Yep, back there. And then we'll take a couple of questions, if you guys can remember. And then...
Great, thanks. I'm Faustine Wabire with Bread for the World. I work for an organization that's also really good at storytelling, and I'd encourage you to read our hunger report, When Women Flourish, We Can End Hunger and Malnutrition.
Exactly,
Thanks,
that's a good
Roger,
one.
for that.
Thank you.
Great. My question is on the SDGs, and Liz, as you rightly mentioned, that this is a transformative agenda. It's universal and has been highly consultative. I think it's fair to say that it's raised expectations. And my question from an advocacy standpoint is, what's your thought about the US government's broader strategy on how do you see that the launch of the SDGs roll out to the US public? I think that that's important, not just from the broader support point of view, but also help us get the ODA dollars that we so badly need to support the implementation, but also to hold all of us accountable. I think we need a certain level of awareness of the SDGs among the US public. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Yep, down here, those two. Dan, you're going second here. One. Thank you.
I'm Selma with Evidence Action. I just wanted to see on the approach to eliminate the hidden hunger, what role will evidence-based research play, do you think, in particular the randomized control trials that have tested interventions to tackle these issues and have some proven impact. How do you see incorporating that into achieving your goals?
Next to you, Dan.
My name is Dan Silverstein. I'm a private sector and capital markets advisor in agricultural development. And as a private sector guy, I don't have any patience. I'm sorry. I try to, and I just don't. Rich, Eric, if one of our objectives is to tell the story better, to convince children of the importance of nutrition, if they all look alike, and so there's a different normal for them than there is for us. I know people in New York who figured out how to put a guy on a horse with a cowboy hat and convince hundreds of millions of people that it was to their advantage to do what the Marlboro Man does, because it was going to fulfill some personal destiny in their lives that was so compelling that their own health didn't even matter. Why aren't we, if this is the urgency, why aren't we talking to whoever that guy is who thought that up, number one? Number two, he's probably dead. As this is the Marlboro Man. Okay. Well, he must have had a relative somewhere up there. And number two, Liz, for you. I'm sorry, I don't know you, but please allow me to call you Liz, if I may. You talked about coordination. Have you explored at all the capability of the Interagency Policy Committee at the NSC to institute some kind of a coordinated effort within the IPC realm? It would seem to me that it would fit nicely with them. And there's also the Interagency Transactions Group, the ITG, which has a number of different iterations, one of which is agriculture, and all of which are designed to try to wrestle the cats, to herd the cats of the federal agencies, as you know, to come into a conference room and deal with each other, bringing their strengths to a problem so that it's not just one person, one agency trying to solve a constituent problem, the constituent often being a United States business or a citizen. But it would seem to me that for coordination, those would be great ways to approach it. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay. We can attack them in whatever order. Liz, if you want to, with Dan's question. Or...
I can speak to two. This is an easy lob. Dan, thank you for your question on IPCs. And thankfully, I can say that we absolutely use that interagency policy mechanism and are using it as we speak. We have IPCs on food security, and we really are pulling together all of the interagency to really come up with the future forward-leaning plan. So we are absolutely using that piece. And that doesn't always message to the public, but it is something that we are doing internally. And then on the SDG point, so important. And I think that, I don't think that we've thought about the universality aspect of the SDGs and how it's going to be so different from the MDGs, because the MDGs, only the kind of global health and development wonks were going to be the ones that know what the 8 goals are. And really what we're trying to do with this post-2015 agenda is make it universal so that, someone in Detroit and someone in Chad both know what it is and it's relevant to their lives. And bringing in the public to that is going to be a really key component. And I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but I can see, one thing that I can see in the future is the opportunity of Rio for the second Nutrition for Growth. At the first Nutrition for Growth in 2013, there was a very strong public citizen component to it. And there were, they brought people together and they got the public to know what was going on with this Nutrition for Growth. I think there is an interest to keep that going. And so in Rio next year, I think that we can use Rio, we can use it being alongside the Olympics as a way to really get the public to understand that this is important. And so maybe that's only the nutrition piece of the SDGs, but that's one thing that we can do. And then we need to look to find other opportunities to kind of tag on to the margins of those things that people pay attention to put our messages in there.
Rick, you taking notes of Schengen?
Go ahead.
Because you can do the data and then
the data and then also the evidence for action. I think this is extremely important. You might recall that IFPRI did a study in Guatemala to look at the long-term impact of child nutrition intervention. After 30 years of interventions, some with and some without, IFPRI was able to trace the impact of these children who benefited from the program. Now, surprisingly, the children who received the treatment, they earn 30% more income. Even when they move to U.S., that's good amount, right? They still earn more money. So this is part of the base to push for the Copenhagen consensus. Copenhagen consensus really highlighted the importance of the nutrition, particularly the child nutrition. Now, we are doing more in Bangladesh. It's a very interesting case was we are doing some experiments, randomized trial, to look at different modalities of transfers. You were talking about social protection, right? Transfers, cash, in kind, or food. And we found that actually sometimes, modality is very important. But if you add education, knowledge, to the mothers, the impact will be 4 times bigger in terms of child stunting reduction.
Yep.
So that evidence is very powerful, very strong.
Yep.
And even Prime Minister recognized, while we're doing everything, but let's make sure that mothers are empowered with knowledge information.
Yep. That's exactly what I'm finding in my reporting. I think moms-to-be, so pregnant women and new moms, are probably the most curious. They're in the highest learning mode of anybody. And that's the time to really say, this is what's really important for you, for your dreams and aspirations of your child. It starts now.
Well, and just one last comment on that as well, and that the data is what really shaped the whole Sun launch. It was the data that was presented in the Lancet over a number of years. It really helped shape that effort. And without that data, I don't know if we would be where we are today with the whole Sun effort. And then to Dan, I appreciate the impatience. We should always be impatient when it comes to malnutrition. So I embrace the impatience. And I think we need to do a better job. I will accept the challenge, all of us, that we need to do a better job of telling this story. And there's more medium now than when the Marlboro Man was riding on his horse to communicate. So I think we have to get more and more creative in using those tools because we know the data, we know the impact, we should be able to communicate more effectively. And I will tell you that Sunday I'm heading out to Los Angeles with that as part of my goal, meeting with some people in Hollywood. So I'm going to get some sunglasses and head out there on Sunday.
So for that, when you think about your time frame for your roadmap, urgency is there.
Yeah, that's true, right.
5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
I was going to say on the data and the trials, the living nature of those, and the longer that they can go on, and Shenga was talking about the one in Guatemala. On my last trip there, I actually met with a woman who was a baby and born in, I think it started in 70 or so, and now she's, 45, what's my math, years old. And she was really interested in terms of what her perception was and what that meant to her, and it drove her to basically finish high school, because she said, I was part of this, she was just feeling, special that she was part of the trial and kind of needed to, fulfill that, in addition to the advantage that she got by being on the positive side of the trial. I guess we have time for another couple of questions. Alan, then we can go back there. Okay, so there's 4 hands in total. We'll take all them and then we'll answer. Is that good? We got 10 more minutes, and that's it.
Yeah, and Alan Bierga from Bloomberg News. In a sense, the response to this last question sort of disproved the point that I was about to make, or maybe you could just say it emphasized it. Having followed these issues of food security for several years now, but not really being an active participant in the community, one thing that I notice, and I cover a lot of areas of agriculture, and it is really something that is striking, especially in the food security world, is there's a tendency, I've observed, to sort of talk a lot about, this is the 3rd roadmap that we've created, and we had this great international agreement at a conference in 2012, and now we have country-led partnerships and collaboration on the ground, and not a lot of emphasis on real-world examples, tangible information. And I can understand why that would happen in a meeting such as this one, where you have a lot of people who are very grounded in the topic, but it tends possibly to create some bad habits in terms of messaging and not being able necessarily to connect with those constituents who you're trying to make that impact for. So the point that the previous questioner was making was a very interesting one, and it was also interesting how you immediately switched into those tangible examples. So what I was originally going to ask, although to a certain extent you've preempted me, but I'll ask you to continue. Could you each specifically talk about one specific concrete success story you have had in the last, maybe since the last roadmap came out, that shows that you are on this roadmap and a person in the lay public should actually support what you're doing?
Great. See, that's a question that's at the forefront of journalists. Show me how this is working. So thank you, Ellen. Okay, let's go. If you can ask your question quickly so we can get through all of them. So we'll start. The microphone can make its way back.
Sure. Hi, my name is Stephen Fomba, and I'm actually visiting from Los Angeles and heading back tomorrow, so hopefully I'll see you there. I work for the Tsuchi Foundation, and it's a compassion relief organization, and one of the things that we do is actually address the needs of those who are poor, sick, and hungry. I am originally from Sierra Leone. I grew up in a small village called Konjo. I am a son of a farmer, so I know exactly what you're talking about when we talk about going to bed hungry. How can a farmer, and his family go to bed hungry? So this is something that I experienced, including also being a refugee in Guinea and also being malnourished through that. As you can see, I'm very tall, right? So the agricultural development efforts really connects with me. I believe that, when, first of all, we appreciate when food is given to us, when rice is given to us, whether by USAID or ID. But the thing that always struck me was, after a couple of days, we're hungry again. And so I said to myself, these programs are not sustainable. So the agricultural development effort connects with me because it makes sense. My first question then is, what are some of the educational programs that you have in place to actually teach farmers how to grow? It's not just because being a farmer, my father was a farmer, and I can assure you that we knew nothing really about agriculture. We just assumed that it's a tradition passed on to us. So what are the educational programs that you have in place to teach farmers how to grow more and to grow better year-round? And also, coming from Sierra Leone, a developing country like that, I can see why we are not having much success in areas like Southeast Asia and Africa. The local governments are not doing a very good job implementing these programs. How are you holding the local governments accountable after they receive funding to implement such programs on the ground? Because we hear about them, some of us hear about them, and majority of the locals never even hear about them, and almost nobody ever see any of the programs on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left, so state the question quickly, and then we got time. Thank you.
I am Emily Bowers with the Congressional Hunger Center. And I have more of a plea than a question, but when we were working on this roadmap document and thought about where to launch it, and the opportunity to launch with GHI at IFPRI came up, we jumped at it because it's a chance to really bring together the research side, the research community with the advocacy community, and the people like me who are going to go to the Hill and talk to policymakers about this. And so the plea I have is to sort of continue and build this community as sort of a joint community, and one where the ongoing research that, as you said, is a living thing and is going on right now as we speak in the field. IFPRI's doing all this wonderful, robust research to get us good information that will back up this case that we're trying to make on the Hill, and get programs to be as effective as possible. And so I want to make sure that we build on what's starting here today.
Thank you, Emily. Excellent point. And then, was there one more in the back, or, yep?
Excuse me. John Lewis, Terra Global Capital, formerly at USAID for 25 years, which means I've been to a lot of UN meetings and we've done a lot of roadmaps. And we're mostly dealing with people like ourselves who are part of the establishment in our countries. And so we don't discuss things like power. And one thing that aid used to always get its hands burned on every time it tried it was land tenure reform, and that's not something we're discussing, and yet the data shows that where women own agricultural land, they grow more nutritious food, which they do know something about, or those communities would have starved and been wiped out a long time ago. And we don't raise those subjects. We go to UN meetings, nobody wants to talk about land tenure reform. Controlling land is a form of leveraging power. And so unless all the donors are lined up and say we're going to go head-to-head on this, and unless we have these fundamental, you can talk about capacity building because that means that's a safe subject. Everyone can learn more. Nobody's rice bowl is broken. But when there's corruption and things that aren't on the table which reproduce poverty, because of course if these regimes, including our own, and we've heard about our medical profession and the fact that our food aid is calories and not nutrition, unless those establishments are challenged by some process, they are presiding over hunger. And yet the data on women owning land is right there. Climate smart agriculture is about perennial crops, which in most of the tropics are controlled by women. Those are the purview of women in subsistence agriculture. And yet they don't plant them because if they improve land, somebody takes it away from them.
Yep,
and that has to stop.
That's a
that is a question, though.
Yep. Well, you're saying we need to challenge people on it. We'll challenge these guys. So that or any of the other points that were raised. Rick, do you want to?
Sure. I think on the last point, then I'll comment on Alan, which will also bring in the other question. It's part of the roadmap in terms of the recommendation about helping provide assistance locally. It's not only technical assistance, capacity building, but also looking at the policy framework that needs to be in place in these countries to allow for the circumstances that you described. Because it is about land tenure, it is about access to credit, it's about a whole host of things, and there needs to be a concerted effort to ensure that those are in place if we want to get out of extreme poverty and chronic hunger. I think the point that Alan made, and talking about agriculture as well, we do need to do a better job of telling the stories, because there's a lot of stories. And let me give you an example of a success. We have a program called Purchase for Progress. This is a program where there's an effort to train local farmers about ways to increase productivity. Part of that includes creating cooperatives, mostly including women farmers who are purposely put in leadership roles in those cooperatives to then not only increase productivity, but then have access to warehousing, drying facilities, and otherwise, where they then can sell to, in our case, a World Food Program, but only as an intermediary step. So in Honduras, as an example, Purchase for Progress in place, sold to the World Food Program. Now they're selling to Walmart. So it's an example of those who were in extreme poverty, suffering from chronic hunger, some assistance, bootstrap assistance, and now they've evolved to a point where they don't need the assistance and they're active participants in the marketplace. One other point I would add to that, and this is something that's happened, there's a new program, a new local and regional purchase program that was just passed as part of the Farm Bill that allows for the purchase of commodities locally to be used in school feeding. This is, once again, the value of the roadmap, putting all of the pieces on the table. You can leverage interventions. So we can buy food from small-scale farmers, help lift them out of extreme poverty and hunger, feed children in schools, helping bolster a safety net program, create those linkages so you're helping a country create their own safety net system. So there's a lot of things, and there are examples, and I think one of my takeaway from this is we got to do a better job of telling the story.
Yep. Here. Let's go to Liz, and then we'll give Schengen the last word since this is his house.
Yeah,
so.
That's fair. So a couple points. One on the land tenure, absolutely, so important to protect women's access to land tenure. And one place that I can actually see that is included and a success in that is looking at the post-2015 development agenda. Land is in there, and land in relation to women is in there. So that's great. The agricultural development, so important, and you're singing the praises of Feed the Future. We look at educational programs, we work with farmers to help them produce more and grow more, and there are it's in place that we hold governments accountable. That is all within the principles of Feed the Future, which speaks to exactly what you were saying. And then a success story. So I can give a kind of wonky policy one, so it's not as feel-good as a person on the ground, but I see a fantastic success story in the 1,000 Days Partnership. So the 1,000 Days started as a Lancet series where a couple of scientists said we have this -9 to +24 time period. And that doesn't mean anything, and that doesn't translate well. And then a couple of really smart people, I wish I was one of them, but I wasn't, got into a room at the State Department and said, what can we do about this? How can we really message that? And that's where they came up with this idea of 1,000 days. And it's so there's such a vision there, and I know exactly what that means, and it's so compelling. And so that, we started pushing that out and trying to build awareness from it. And now I can point to multiple countries around the world that have taken that and owned that, and it's theirs. Guatemala, they have their 1,000 Days program. It's theirs. It has nothing to do with the State Department, and that's fantastic. We see it in Zambia. We see it in Tanzania. We see it in a lot of Indonesia, just really spreading like wildfire, and that is a success story for me.
Can I just say, the people who worked on that messaging are now working on a campaign, so
Right.
who knows?
Yep.
Hopefully it's there. So I was just going to say that the question on agriculture development, and you're talking about the teaching of things, that extension work is so critical, and had been so badly neglected over the past couple of decades. But now it's coming much more into fore by a whole lot of organizations that are working on the ground, and it's also a key part of Feed the Future and what a lot of people are doing. So, Shangan, last word.
Yeah, well, successful story. I think if you wanted to succeed, start to change yourself. The CGIAR, the organization I have worked for 20 years, we begin to change our thinking. As you know, the Green Revolution, the CGIAR's objective was to produce more food, yes, more high-yielding varieties. But today, that's not acceptable anymore. The newer technologies, newer practices, newer policies proposed by CGIAR must have multiple wins. Yes, we still need to produce more, but we also have to produce more with less water, less energy, less carbon emission. But more importantly, more nutritious food. So the whole CGIAR has changed. So nutrition has become one of the strategic objectives of the CGIAR among three top strategic objectives. The IFPRI has changed. We have one of the largest nutritionist group here among all the development agencies, 20 or 30. That's because we recognize how important nutrition is in development. And we also launched a very large research program to link agriculture for nutrition and health, specifically to link agriculture, nutrition and health. Under that program, there is a program called biofortification. You must know that. So through breeding, we can add micronutrients into different crops: maize, corn, wheat, sweet potato, cassava, you name it.
Beans.
Yeah, beans. Millions of farmers have adopted so-called biofortified crops with high concentration of micronutrients. Now, on the food aid. Yes, well, I think many have discussed about the food aid modalities. Simply giving food, particularly calories, to poor is not good anymore. How can we really help the poor to access to food in short run, and then build their capacity to grow their own food? It's called productive safety net programs in Ethiopia, in Bangladesh. Again, I can also classify that as a successful program. Now, lastly, I wanted to emphasize the role of evidence, research-based evidence in advocacy. Without credible evidence, your advocacy will not be credible, and you will change your story very often. So some of the initiatives, like 1,000 Days, Growth for Nutrition for Growth, New Alliance, came because we had strong evidence to show, why the child stunting is so damaging. Why we should focus on nutrition. It's not just a development problem, it's also an economic problem. It's a human capital problem. So I think evidence and advocacy can work together, and you have our support.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of our time, the end of our road. Map. According to the map that I have in front of me. So
where's the map?
Thank you.